I got one on my Patreon from our first investor, and he was like, "Hey, have you ever thought about raising money?" And I like kind of told him to pound sand. I was like, "Thanks, but no thanks." And he was like, "Let's just hop on a call. I just want to see this thing succeed. Like, read up what a safe note is." And I did. And I was like, "Oh, wow. Okay, never mind. This is wild." Hello, and welcome to the Open Hardware Manufacturing Podcast, the podcast about making open source hardware. My name is Stephen Haas.
And I'm Lucian Chapar.
And today's episode is about making money with open hardware. This could be really weird, trying to find a way to take a thing where, like, typically in how a lot of IP works, it's like, oh, the way you make money is by keeping it all locked down and closed, and trying to still find a way to work on open hardware and making it sustainable and still being able to make money on it so you can pay your bills and put food on the table is weird and hard to do in many instances. So in this episode, we go into the ways that you can go about doing that, whether it's from actually selling the thing you do, different royalty methodologies, different ways that you can do licensing if you want to approach that, grants, making donations. There's a bunch of different ways you can go about doing it, but it is hard. It is hard to find a way to make money from this kind of thing. It is always going to be non-standard and depend on your situation.
Yeah, my grandparents find all of this confusing. Wait,
Mine do too.
Wait, you do what? You sell it? You make money how? You give it away? What?
Yeah, but the source is just available?
Where's the patent?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's funny. But there are ways. And I enjoyed this episode, and I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Let's do it.
So the first and probably most obvious way of making money with open hardware is selling the hardware. Like, that is the most logical first reasonable thing.
Pretty straightforward one.
Yeah, it is pretty straightforward. And I think throughout the course of this, we'll probably have a lot of comparisons with open hardware versus open software because they're very, very different things in how money works with it. But hardware in general costs a lot of money to quote unquote compile. Like, to take the source and turn it into the usable binary, the usable thing, takes a lot of money and time. Software is effectively free.
Yeah, our joke is that hardware is hard.
Yes, I think that's also a lot of other people's joke too. I
stole it from somewhere.
Yeah, it's very true. And software is, you can click a button, you can run a command on your computer and it compiles. It is not nearly the same with hardware. So having someone pay you for the trouble of doing that is a fantastic way to make money doing it that does not infringe at all on the fact that it's open or limiting ability to access the source or do what you want with it. It's like a convenience almost of accessing the source code in its usable format.
Yeah, and that's true, be it like a kit or like a fully assembled, tested, and like beautifully packaged thing.
Yeah. Fully assembled out of the box, ready to rock, or a kit, like varying degrees of finished and done and project versus tool.
Yeah. You can dive as deep into that as you'd reasonably think. Like, maybe you're just selling someone the unique component and the rest is like a hardware store part.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like I'd say a few months ago, I made the open flexure microscope.
Yeah.
It's probably like 6 months ago now or something. It was really cool. And I bought a kit that had only the really tricky to source things. So it had like some hardware that was weird, a couple lenses, and that was kind of it. And then everything else you printed yourself and you sourced yourself. So they made some money there on that, just selling that limited scope of things. Or you sell the whole kit and then you put it together, or you sell, like us, the whole darn thing and you just bolt together a handful of pieces and it's ready to rock. Like Ryan from V1 Engineering, he sells kits of all the parts and then you put all that stuff together. He also sells all the individual stuff. So a lot of places that you can kind of feather this of how much work do you want to do for how much juice is worth the squeeze.
But it can require a massive infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like for us, it's 3-4 people on assembly. It's customer support. There's a whole lot to it. So it's not necessarily the easiest way to do this.
Yeah, I would say is probably one of the harder ways to make money with open hardware. There are a lot of easier ways to make money with that. So if you're actually going to do this, there's another part of it, which is you need money to start.
Yes.
Like, you have to get money in your bank so you can spend the money on all the materials that goes into compiling it to sell it. There's a lot of ways to do that. The simplest and kind of most straightforward one is bootstrapping, which is you just take your own money, you put it into the thing. And this is how the Lumen started out. was me saving up a ton of money and putting all that money into development and like trying to get stuff for kits together. And it works, but it's slow.
Yeah. Plenty of awesome people. Just like the Lumen, they develop their project one paycheck at a time in their evenings as they can afford it.
Yep. And, you know, as you slowly build that up, it's not going to be like this big infusion of cash like there are methods we'll talk about in a second where you kick it off. It's you have a few $1,000s here. You buy some parts, you sell 3 kits. The money comes in from those 3 kits. You have enough to now make 5 kits. You make those 5 kits you saw. Now you have enough to make 7 kits. And like, it's this very slow, gradual, iterative process where it's very slow.
Yeah.
But you have complete control over what you do.
It's almost like the pro hobby route.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like the step right above. It's a hobby. You're now, you're trying to reach and grab every little extra bit of profit you roll back into the next batch of production. You need to have a lot of free time and a lot of free time and some money that you can put towards this. Like depending on what you're doing, you might need a lot of money, like tens of thousands of dollars to kick off one of these things. Yeah. Like even the Lumen is not a wildly complicated thing. It still took a ton of money for our first batch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was not easy.
Yeah.
And like maybe a little advice here, like try to keep the design to the computer for as long as you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it doesn't need to necessarily leave CAD before like every single part's designed. Like just let it cook for as long as it can before you have to start buying stuff. Yeah. Lean on those free samples of things as much as you possibly can. Engineering prototype samples. That's a good way to do it. And what's really nice about it is you have total control. No one can tell you what to do. No one can tell you whether or not you have to open or close source it. Like it is your thing and you get to decide how that works. The next tier up is doing like crowdfunding kind of methodologies. And this gets you money, but it's kind of like, I don't know. Tell me if you disagree with this. Yeah. Like it feels a lot to me like it's kind of cart before the horse. The thing should be, well, it depends on where you are with your Kickstarter, right? Because if you've already done all your R&D for your thing before you launch your Kickstarter, you've already bootstrapped. And then the money for the Kickstarter is really going into like manufacturing production. And I think that's typically how most people do it. That's the cleaner way to play it.
Yeah.
A lot of the time we see someone advertise the Kickstarter campaign as like the concept or the idea of something or with like renders, and they haven't necessarily done all of the R&D yet.
Yeah.
They're saving themselves a lot of, maybe what they're doing there is not taking the time to develop something if there's no product market fit.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I think probably why this is so weird for crowdfunding campaigns is like a crowdfunding campaign is a great way to test product market fit. Like, oh yeah, people actually want this thing. This is worth doing. But in order to really, the way you should run a Kickstarter is you've already validated the thing. You have a very stable working prototype. You're ready to go into production. So you've already spent all that time and money. So it's almost kind of like, that's kind of why it feels cart before the horse a little bit.
Yeah. A lot of people treat Kickstarter as like a really good way to bring thousands of people to buy their thing that's fully baked out with the factory set up to make the product. Right. Like I think about Recon Tools, the M1 caliper, that like smart tape measure, some Formlabs alumni made.
Yep.
They knew how to contact investors. They knew how to get VC money in, but by going the grassroots Kickstarter crowdfunding movement, they were able to keep control of their funding avenue and get a couple $1 million in like within a month.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty, and not for exchange of equity either. Yeah. It was just for Kickstarter's cut and then selling the thing, which is exactly what they wanted to do anyway. So it is a good way to do it. Even Creality did this with the CR30. Like a lot of 3D printer companies will run a Kickstarter for their printer. They have a factory, they're doing their thing. Yeah. It's just like a way of, I don't know, bringing customers. It's almost like a network of having people find the thing too. It's a discovery effect as well.
Yeah, it's a big part of it. What I think is fun about it as well is if you don't know how in demand your product is going to be, it will show you before you've committed more capital. Like you don't know how much money to raise if you're looking to say 10 machines a year versus 10,000.
Sure.
By seeing what the Kickstarter success looks like, it can help you gauge like, okay, how legitimate does this factory need to be? How big does my team need to get? Like your glow tie.
Yeah.
That's a great example where.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah. You weren't sure how big that was going to get.
Yeah. And when I only sold 100, I'm like, cool, no need to get an injection molding die made. That would be a huge waste of money. And like, if I had done that ahead of time, well, okay, now I've burned how many grand getting this thing machined for a thing I needed 100 shots of? Like that would have been silly. So that's a really good point. Like your R&D should be done. It's about how do you scale up for your manufacturing? Like you should already know your product market fit. It's how big is your market?
Yeah.
That's what the Kickstarter is telling you.
And so it's a really good strength of it for sure.
Mm-hmm. And this is also only like starting the process of going off. Like, I mean, you can do them like we were just talking about. Like there are companies that do Kickstarters like throughout the course of the company, but typically a Kickstarter is just kind of for the beginning. You know, it kind of kicks you off. Like Formlabs is a great example. They did a Kickstarter, and then after that, they just kept raising VC money over and over and over again.
Yep.
And they never did another Kickstarter. So, you know, it's a good way to kind of get going.
I would say for sure.
Yeah.
There's a similar website to Kickstarter called Crowd Supply.
Yeah.
And they're really awesome. They're exclusively for open hardware.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like Kickstarter. It's a platform where you can announce your product. You can bring in attention. You could have people commit at different tiers. But what's fun about it is that they're much more involved in bringing your product to market. They have very strong relationships to manufacturers, and they'll make introductions. They don't really seem to let people fail.
Yeah, it is they force you to write updates at a cadence. Like Nick Poole, really, really cool guy. He did the bean counter, which is like this little thing for measuring like how many parts are in component tape. He did a Crowd Supply for that. And like his updates throughout the course of the campaign were like mandated by Crowd Supply. And Crowd Supply, I think they even do distribution. I could be wrong about that, but like they are really, really heavy handed in like helping you get it to be successful. It's still your thing, but they are a partner more than anything else. I believe it's only open stuff too.
That's my impression as well.
Yeah.
We haven't done a Crowd Supply for anything yet. I'd love to as an exercise. It hasn't been relevant yet.
Yeah.
Maybe for a Nerf blaster.
Sure. Yeah. Maybe for some like fun one-off thing, but yeah, it is a really cool way to bring capital in there and also validate how big of a manufacturing process do you need to go through. So yeah, that's another one. And then we get into like some of the more spicy things of getting money in-house to work on this stuff.
Oh yeah.
This is now raising money. So there are kind of, I don't know, maybe this is diluting it too much, but I think about this kind of broken down into like two separate categories, which are safe notes and actual venture capital in exchange for equity fundraising. So Opula raised safe notes. So a safe note is effectively a check where for whatever amount of money that they pay you, if you ever have a proper valuation at some point in the future, that amount of money buys you that amount of equity. So let's say you raise $100,000 through a safe note. In 2 years, you're valued at $1 million. The investor at that point would then get 10% of your company because $100,000 is 10% of your valuation. There's also limits and caps and all that other kind of stuff. So it's a little more complicated than that. And also you never have to actually do that fundraising round. So there's no time limit. It's not convertible debt. It's not like you ever have to pay that money back.
Yeah, there's no control.
Yes. It doesn't even have information rights. So like the investors don't even have rights to information about how the company is doing. It's incredibly hands off. It's really just like, here's a bunch of money, go for it. If this goes totally wild and kicks butt, I want a little sugar. I want a little something. But aside from that, it's just kind of yours. Like, go for it. There's no expectation of paying it off or converting or anything like that. Awesome. If you can get those, that is fantastic. If you can find someone who's interested in doing that, a safe note is a fantastic method of raising money, especially open, because you still get to maintain that it's open source, which is really nice. Actually, when we first got a message, I got one on my Patreon from our first investor, and he was like, "Hey, have you ever thought about raising money?" And I like kind of told him to pound sand. I was like, "No, I have no interest. Thanks, but no thanks." Because I thought it was going to be like, "Oh, I'm going to take equity and I'm going to want to close source it and blah, 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 blah." And I was just like so bullish on like not even hearing it out. And he was like, "Dude, let's just hop on a call. Let me explain to you what this is going to be." And I was like, "Okay." And I hop on the call and he was like, "Yeah, dude, I just want to see this thing succeed. Like, read up what a safe note is." And I did. And I was like, "Oh, wow. Okay, never mind. This is wild." So yeah, that was, we're on the best timeline where he was like, "No, hear me out." Because I was like not hearing it. I was not interested. But yeah.
A very famous investor too.
Yes. Yeah. He's a good dude.
And this is the standard model for how Y Combinator, a very famous entrepreneurship incubator, startup incubator, invests in companies.
Yeah. I think they write a safe to like every company in a batch.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not super familiar with how their format works.
Yeah. It's like ycombinator.com/deal. Yeah, it's just on their website. They give everyone the same deal unless you're like a very late stage startup.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Which is kind of neat.
Yeah. Yeah, it is cool.
It converts to like 7% equity typically, I think I saw.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really, and most of the companies leaving Y Combinator are going to raise a full institutional venture capital round where they're valued. And then that money does convert to equity. But if you never want to raise again, if you just raise safe notes and you never get valued as a company in like an institutional VC round, there's no equity exchange. It just never happens. So that's really cool. The big spooky boy is a full venture capital round, which is a lot more money typically. Safe notes don't usually get to be that big. I have heard of them going up to a few million, but I think that's more rare. It depends. It depends on the investor. Typically safes are pre-seed money. So it's a smaller amount to kind of just kick the tires, get the ball rolling. But VC is like many millions, you know?
Yeah, they don't write small checks and they don't care to write a small check.
Yes. Yeah.
What we've heard from investors is no matter how big the check is, you're getting the same attention.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. And it was funny when we were actually going through a fundraising round. We were like, honestly, we were just trying to raise a little bit more money right before we launched the first version of the machine. And we were asking for too little. And there were a lot of times where I did probably 24 VC meetings or something. There were so many where I was just like on there pitching to them, talking to different people, getting connected from one person to another, whatever. And when they would ask how much we wanted, they were like, oh, that's like not a lot of money. And I think that kind of made them go like, oh, this isn't like a crazy rocket ship that a lot of VC funds want to invest in. It's more of a steady growth kind of thing. Also, if they're not getting that much equity in exchange, it's not worth it for them. If they're betting on a horse, they want to bet. Yeah. They want to put money in. They want to get equity. They want to be part of it. They don't want to half-ass it, you know? So yeah, we got a lot of people saying like, no, we give you more money, but we won't give you what you're asking for. And we're like, okay, then no, sorry. Like we don't want to raise that much. It was weird.
It really was funny. One of them even liked us a lot. They're like, come back if you want more.
Yeah.
Like, we're interested, but not at this amount. And it was like, it felt great to hear that. But also, it's probably wise to not ask for more than you actually need.
Exactly. Like it's a balance. It depends on how you want to play the game. Astronomical growth can be really cool. It's also hard to keep track of and hard to manage and hard to make sure that you're continuously staying in control of it. And like a lot of the times with that comes some of your investors are on your board of directors and they have voting rights. And that's where it starts to get more messy. So it can be great. I know folks that have raised a lot of VC money and it has worked out really well for them in many instances. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So it can be really good if your investors are good. I think that's probably the biggest thesis. Like there were a lot of firms that actually reached out to us who were only invest in open source. So making sure that you're on the same page as them on that whole ethos up front is super important.
Yeah, it's important to like these people because you'll be dealing with them for the rest of the company's existence.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. For the rest of the company's existence without an asterisk. Yeah.
What's important there too is like, who do those investors know? You're getting their network. Maybe it's less about the money and it's more about like, okay, this person manages a massive supply chain for a global conglomerate and they'll make an introduction. Yeah. Like you can be very strategic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It sometimes it is quite a bit less about the money. It's more of like, who's in my court? Yeah. So fundraising is a whole separate thing. It's a whole separate thing, but that's another way to do it. Again, it just depends on how you want to kind of kick it off. But those are kind of the main ways of kind of getting some money in to start selling stuff. If that's your approach, if you do want to actually try and move hardware, you want to ship actual hardware, those are some of the kind of the different tiers of aggression is almost how I think about it. Like how much do you want to just like full send versus like kind of baby it and let it grow at its own pace?
Yeah. Do you want to go rent Silicon Valley office day one or start out in your living room?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can pick anywhere in between.
All fun.
Yeah, it is all fun.
An interesting thing about VCs was that we had this preconceived notion that they would hate open source. They wouldn't understand it. They'd think it's moronic to not have patents. But we really came in to learn that it's becoming almost in vogue. It's cool to be open source. It's cool to do open hardware. There's plenty of VC firms, like Steven said earlier, that only do open source. Yeah. So it's no longer outlandish to not have patents. It's acceptable to make a pitch deck that mentions your open source hardware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And right in line with that, like mentioning it up front and being very transparent of like, this is how we're playing the game. Because if they're like, no, I'm not interested in this, immediately stop the relationship. Yeah. Like you should be so on the same page. And that's when we were talking with our first investor, Joel. I told him this. I'm like, listen, I'm never going to close this source. This is how I want this thing to operate. How does that sound to you? He's like, great. I was like, okay. I mean, super, super, super upfront. Like, do not take that money unless you're on the same page, because it is going to cause so many problems for you. So,
and of course, there's always a rich uncle, but not all of us can be so lucky.
Yes, yeah. Friends and family fundraising is like, I kind of think of this going along with bootstrapping a little bit, because there's actually recently, I think it's the federal government made it such that you have to be what's called an accredited investor to make an investment in a company. Yeah. You have to like have over
net worth of 2 million.
Yeah, over 2 million and have made over $250,000 a year for something like that. I don't know exactly, but there's rules where you cannot invest otherwise. So this might be a little different. Like this might be uncle writes you a check and it's not like a formal thing. I'm not really sure. I've never raised money with this method.
Yeah, I'd recommend against it. You don't want to mix family and business, and like you don't want that uncle to hate you if your startup was a bad idea.
Yeah, that's tough. Like I'm sure there's worlds where it makes sense, but like I think they might be few and far between, at least from my perspective. It would be weird for me to mix family with an entrepreneurial endeavor just personally. But if your situation leads to that, then like something to entertain, but just be very cautious.
Yeah,
because it's that gets muddy.
Yeah, make sure communication there probably matters more importantly than anywhere else.
Yep. Yep.
So tread cautiously if you're playing that game.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that's a lot of ways to think about capital here.
Yep. Yeah. And then once you have that money, now you actually have to start moving them. You have to sell them. And that only happens if people know about what you're making. So like one of the hardest parts about actually selling your open hardware is like having people buy it. Like people, and this kind of goes for pretty much every other thing here is like, if your project is tiny and people don't know about it, you're going to have a really hard time making money on it.
I don't know what you'd do.
Yeah, exactly. Like you need people to be aware of it to then give you money for it in some capacity. Yeah. So much of this whole thing is getting in front of people. The way we did that was with YouTube, which has worked out really well. But there's a lot of ways to go about like actually trying to get it in front of people. Some people will just post it on Hacker News and Product Hunt and hope that does well. And that's all right. That works for a lot of people. And if you have investors, you have a network of people who will distribute it and share the fact that you're working on that thing. Obviously I'm very biased towards YouTube. It worked very, very, very well for us.
Yeah. I think it was Chris from CNC Labs that was telling us that wood carving conventions are a great place for them to acquire customers.
Right. Yep.
Similarly, more close to the 3D printing space, like taking your project to like a Rep Rap festival, like Rocky Mountain Rep Rap Fest or East Coast Rep Rap Fest. Sorry, 3D Printopia.
Yeah, that's right. They changed the name.
Yeah, they did. Fun name. And getting eyeballs on it, because then people will be like, how can I follow you?
Yeah.
How do I support this?
Yeah. Yeah. Sharing it is like such an important thing. And that has to happen early on, like as you're doing development, I think, because, open source is in a community. Like open source really shines when there's a community. That community can also lead to word of mouth to lead to customers. And doing the development in the open is a great way to foster all of that stuff all together. So yeah, you need the people to be there, to be interested in the thing, to pay you the money for the thing. Like that's a necessary thing of it.
For sure.
There's also ways to brute force this of like buying ads, but I cannot recommend against this enough early on. Like we've tried to spend money on ads for the Pick and Place, and we feel like we have a pretty good understanding of our target market and who's interested in it. But even that understanding is not nearly good enough to have ads be really, really successful for us. Like they do convert, but you need to know who those people are so well. I think getting the community built first is such a better organic way to get that early group of people who are going to be interested in what you're working on, rather than just like spew ads out about it. Like it's just not cart before the horse.
Yeah. Ads sharing a product without there being a community behind it just looks kind of artificial.
Yeah.
Or maybe the word astroturfing is appropriate. It's just like you're just trying to like force it into people's faces without there being a group of people to back it up. Like it's just kind of not gross, but it just doesn't work well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because what do people want to see when they come to an open source project? If you're like, oh, when was the last commit? When was this? How is this maintained? How many people are in the community? That is the thing that achieves buy-in for an open source project. So having that is the first thing. That is the prereq. That is the very first thing you need to do. So I don't know. There's no like really good universal panacea answer for this. It's like, just get people to be aware of it and interested in it.
I think I'd try a thing like meet people where they're at. Like if you're making an open source CNC motion controller, go on Linux CNC forums.
Right.
Like, go talk to the Gerbil people. Like be on the forums. Make yourself important to these communities and share what you're like looking to add to it.
Right.
Like that's the most honest answer, I think, to it.
Yeah, I think so.
Be relevant.
Yes. Yeah. Be relevant and be where the people that you're building the thing for are.
Yeah.
I was a little more buckshot with YouTube and like Reddit and Twitter and whatever. But, you know, you can niche down. You can find little niches of those folks, too.
I see the funnest open hardware sold out for mechanical keyboards just by being posted to like the Mech Keys subreddit.
Right. Yep.
There's a lot of Discord communities for this stuff, too. So go find them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. Foster people from that as well. Like the AdaPile, really, really cool project. They're trying to make the schematic for a KiCad project be like a Python module that is like Git trackable and stuff. It's a really, really cool project. They popped into the Lumen server and they're like, hey, what would you guys like to see from this? We're the AdaPile guys. And a bunch of people moved over into that community from the Lumen. Tons of overlap between PCB designers and people that are interested in a desktop pick and place. That is a huge overlap in the Venn diagram.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Another fun way to make money from open hardware is licensing.
Yes.
I'm a part of the open source Nerf Blaster development community, and I see many designers make a lot of money by licensing their products. Many designers will do Creative Commons non-commercial share-alike licenses, and then they will shop out the rights to build their blasters to various like blaster companies.
Right.
So like Luke from Out of Darts runs a fantastic web store where he sells dozens of different designers blasters, and he gives them royalties to use those files for a commercial purpose.
Yep.
It lets people focus on their craft of designing blasters. They don't need to be experts in fulfillment. They don't need to run a print farm. It's a very low cost to get going. Like anyone listening with FreeCAD on their computer could get themselves into this situation.
Yeah. And then you have any home gamer can put the thing together. And then if you want to do it for a commercial thing, then you license it out, you get the royalties. And like, it's like you said, it's a way that you don't have to deal with the whole print farm, but you can still make a living doing the designing of it.
Yeah.
You can also do that by not licensing it non-commercial and just having a relationship with the manufacturers. Like this is the way to kind of force that to happen. But doing this like licensing thing, I've really only seen it in Nerf. Is there other places? I can't even think of another example like where this kind of like licensing out the design like this exists.
I'm not a part of many communities where I've seen it work this way, but if anyone listening has reference, I'd love to hear about it.
Yes.
It works really well for Nerf though, because I think it's gotten the way it is because there's not necessarily enough money to let everyone run a major Nerf blaster company or dart blaster company.
Right.
So like there is going to be some consolidation. It makes more sense for there to be a couple big players that will print various people's stuff.
Right.
It's a small little hobby industry.
Yep. And most people don't want to deal with the whole print farm.
Yeah.
But like a few people are like, you know what? No, I'm going to make this my thing. This is going to be my project. So it can be everyone else's tool.
Yeah.
I'm going to run a print farm for these parts. And then it works out great. It's a symbiotic relationship.
A cute way of breaking through the CC-on-C license and letting people resell your stuff quickly that I've seen is selling the commercial like one-time selling. No, what I've seen them do is sell a one-time use commercial license on like their Etsy or their Ko-fi, whatever.
Yeah.
Where, hey, you download this file, you buy this file, and then you're granted the right to use the file set commercially one time.
Oh.
I've seen that with like embroidery files. I've seen that with Nerf blaster files. It's kind of fun.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, embroidery files. I bet Etsy is a huge bastion of this kind of thing. Of like just individual design files where you effectively like buy the like embroidery is a great example of that. Yeah.
So it's just a fun way to approach making money through licensing your open hardware.
Yeah. That is a really cool way to go about doing it. If you kind of don't want to deal with making them, you know, it can also be really tough though, because you have to work with. I actually built a slab, which is a Nerf blaster from Out of Darts, which was designed by someone else, not at all in Out of Darts. And I remember like the early units, like the push rod for the trigger would unscrew a little bit, and they kind of like worked back and forth on figuring out where to add thread locker. And like you're kind of a designer and a vendor now, or manufacturer. Like you kind of almost have a CM, a contract manufacturer for you in some kind of way, but it's them selling it. It's a weird thing. So it's not quite like you just kick it over the fence and have them own it. You still have to work with them about it, but yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a chiller balance than taking on the entire print farm and manufacturing and distribution and selling and all that stuff yourself. It's a lot.
For sure.
Yep.
So that's licensing.
I didn't realize that people will do it so you could just buy a one-time license. So will people buy that license and then build one blaster and then sell that one blaster?
Yeah. Like there's certain blaster designs where if you wanted to give me more than just material cost and like give me $100 towards it, yeah, I would go buy that file set.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's better than just setting up a royalty deal with them because it's autonomous and you don't have to actually like talk with them and like negotiate rates and stuff like that.
What's the point in setting up this whole like inked deal with someone that wants to sell their friend one blaster?
Right. Okay. So it's meant for like small quantities typically.
I've seen it go a couple different ways. I'm not saying it's a scalable arrangement or like good, but like one of my friends who runs a competing blaster store has to buy the file set multiple times just because it's the right way to do it.
Interesting.
Sometimes she has to buy the hardware kit from the designer, and that's like the commercial use license.
Really?
Yeah, which is kind of fun.
That is interesting.
Like you can use this design commercially as long as you buy the core components from me.
Sure. Interesting. That's funky.
Yeah.
That's a really creative way to do it. Yeah. So dual licensing is a thing. Mm-hmm. You know, if that is the angle that you want to go, you want to choose to, license it out differently for commercial, you can do that.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's been politically interesting is when China clones the blaster with a given license and like the community's reaction to it.
Yeah.
But
because I'm assuming they are not buying the file every time. Because that would be the contention point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like another contention thing is what is a unique idea worth like giving someone credit for?
Right.
Like everything in Nerf is iterative to me. Like very rarely is there a blaster that's like completely fundamentally unique.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's like, can someone demand royalties for any blaster that contains their manner of sealing the barrel's breech?
Right. Probably not.
Some people would argue the opposite though.
Sure.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Open hardware is without patents, it just requires community enforcement and like community judgment a lot of the time.
Yeah. And it also depends on your definition of open. Because like I would say, the most open is you do not limit commercial use. So like, it's open in that the source files are still shared. You can still see them. But if you want to use them in a certain way, there's a limitation on it. It's just a different way to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that gets kind of messy. What are the terms of using it? I guess that gets into whatever copyright, whatever license I should say they actually apply on it.
Yeah.
How does that handle derivative works, of ideas versus like the actual source file? I don't know.
Big reason why I'm not a huge fan of CCNC for most things.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think this leads well into like the support angle.
Yes. This is a weird, and I don't really know if this has happened before in hardware that I'm aware of. So if you know of an example of this, you hear me talking about this and you're like, oh, this is so-and-so, drop us an email at podcast@opula.io or hop on our Discord and tell us, because I'm not aware of it. But let me get to the point. So KiCad and Ubuntu do this with software where it's free. You can download an Ubuntu build. You can download KiCad for free. But if you want like fancy specialized support, you want enterprise grade support, you want server grade support, you want KiCad to add a feature or whatever, then you pay them for that support. So, you can go, I forget the name of the organization, but there's like a company, the KiCad company, and you can pay them to like add a specific feature for your weird use case or whatever. And Ubuntu, if you have a huge, you're running a server farm or whatever, and you were running Ubuntu and you need some custom thing, you need some support there, you pay Canonical money for that. And it's for the support. Source is still open, but they will help you get it running. There's someone on the phone. They're primarily a support company. So for hardware, this is weird because compilation is free, right? For software, effectively free. You're still making the user do the compilation. So this is a group of people that have built it already, or maybe even bought it from a third party, even in the Nerf blaster example. Yeah. Let's say, Bob designs a blaster out of darts, makes it and distributes it. but Bob will also sell you the licensing, or not the licensing, but Bob will sell you the support.
Yeah.
So you're like, hey, my blaster isn't working. Pay him $10 and he'll hop on the call with you and help you debug your blaster.
Weird one.
I don't know if that's a thing.
I think support's usually coupled into other like revenue generating sources.
Yeah.
Like paid support, sure, all the time for like I plenty of open drone companies out there with huge paid support. I don't know why I picked them, but
yeah.
But to only support, I don't. Maybe more so for customization. Requests.
Maybe. Yeah. Weird mods and stuff, which is kind of what KiCad is. It's like, if you want some ad, and I'm pretty sure this is what it is. Like, there is an organization that you can pay to get stuff into KiCad or custom stuff for KiCad if you need it. So like, maybe it is a modification. It's almost like contract work is kind of how maybe more of what it's like. You could glom onto an existing open source project because you need a project that this is based off of, like a lot of people that you're going to support. So like, maybe an example of this is like, you have a Prusa printer reseller, maybe not reseller because that's its own thing, but like repair service, like you offer your own thing, but Prusa does that. So why would you go to this other organization? I'm not sure. Like, this is kind of just an idea that exists in software, and I'm not sure how it would work in hardware.
The closest thing might be like, I'm thinking about RCF, who was paid to go do the V0 spin for Cocoa Press.
Right. That's more contract work though. It's not customer support.
It's supporting a.
He designed a new thing.
Yeah.
It's closer to the KiCad like contracting.
Sure.
I don't know. It's weird. It's almost like if, it's like if we had a paid thing on our website where you could buy customer support for your Lumen build. Like, we just give everyone customer support for the machines they buy, of course. But if you built one, you could pay us for customer support for your build.
Oh, that's kind of cool, actually.
That's what, we just support those people anyway without charging them. But, I think that's maybe what that looks like, because that's what it is with Canonical and Ubuntu, is they have an operating system that's free and open source. Anyone can build one, like the builders of the Lumen. You can buy it, enterprise grade stuff, or you could just pay them for the support. I guess that's what that would look like.
I could see that being the case of like, hey, if you want to pay to join this 3D printer designers Discord, it's $5 a month and you'll get support and you can ask questions.
Right.
That's the closest thing I've seen to that.
Sure. Or almost like, this isn't paid, but like how in Voron, like you can get access to certain like aspects of the community, like certain like servers and stuff, if you have a serial. Like, you have to get to that point and then you're kind of in this new group of community that's support, but it's not paid necessarily. I don't know. It's weird. It's really weird. We get into this example a little bit later of a multi-board, which is kind of like it's like Gridfinity, but for like the wall, for like mounting stuff. It's like a universal like mounting format. It's pretty cool. You can pay to be in like, they recently started like a community hub thing. And I think you have to pay to be in certain parts of it. So like, that's like being paid to access to the community, which is kind of different, but it's still kind of support. I don't know. It's very weird. There's a lot of ways to play it. But so if you're listening to us ramble on about this and you're like, oh my God, you dummies, what about XYZ? Please tell us. Please tell us. Cause I'm curious about if anyone is doing this for open hardware in some way of just selling support.
I vaguely recall in my childhood coming across forums with paid sections. So I really wouldn't be shocked if there's an open hardware project where you have to pay to be a part of the forum.
Yeah, I could see that.
It'd be a way to do this.
It would be a way to do it. Yeah. It's a bit icky to guard the community behind a paywall, but I don't know. It depends on how you want to play it. I guess it's technically a way you could do it, but you're not really paying for support there. You're paying for access to a community that happens to support it.
Yeah. Steve and I recently met a Nerf designer that sells his file set for $1. And with that, you get his full support.
That's right.
The file set, I think, was freely available otherwise.
Yeah.
But you weren't getting his support unless you gave him $1.
That's true. Yeah, I totally forgot about this. Yeah, he was like, yeah, if you just pay me $1 for the files, it's like a signal to me that you care enough about this that I will support you. Like, he's not trying to make money from it. It's almost like a token.
Yeah.
But if he charged like more, then okay, now it's kind of like that becomes a way to make money with the open hardware thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it all depends on your balance. Maybe you really don't want to support the builders and you don't have time to do that, or you choose not to do that, and you really, that's your avenue of making money. That is an option. You could charge for help with builds.
Yeah. And then another angle too is like research grants.
Yeah.
There's many asterisks to this, but there's lots of grants available for funding open source hardware, open source software.
Yep.
Just funding technology.
Yes.
So university grants, as well as government funded grants, as well as like, I think even foundations will just put out grants, like private entities coming together, like, and even NGOs.
Yeah.
And like, so towards this, a really fun example of government backed grants for open hardware is with the Next Generation EU.
Okay.
It's an 800 billion euro fund put together for various initiatives in like technology and like society.
This is an EU thing.
Yeah.
Wow. I've never even heard of this before.
Yeah. There's Matthias from Infantry
Yeah.
told me about all these various EU grant initiatives for funding technology and science and all of this. And this program, Next Generation EU, funded the Open Lab Starter Kit.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
They have a series of open source hardware machines.
Mhm.
So they have a small 3D printer, they have a laser cutter, they have a small CNC, they have vinyl cutters, they have a 3D scanner, they have large format printers and CNCs, and all of their stuff is on GitHub. And all of the fantastic people's time that went into this was funded by Next Generation EU.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
Wow. Wow, this is sick. This is wicked cool.
Yep.
Wow, they've got a bunch. They have a vinyl cutter and printers, laser cutter. Like it's like any fabrication machine.
Yeah.
Wow.
If you're fortunate enough to live in Europe, there's so many EU grants for open source. They want more of it.
Yep.
There's also the European Open Source Initiative, which I'm less familiar with, but it's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
They look to fund open source hardware.
Yep.
The US, I can't speak to as many grant avenues.
Yeah, the NSF, the U.S. National Science Foundation, has a bunch of grants too that you can apply for. One that we were looking at, and a buddy of mine who is at MIT who's doing stuff with pneumatics, he recommended looking into the POSE grant, which is the Pathways to Enable Open Source Ecosystems. So they will effectively pay you a grant to try and develop a new open source methodology and system of doing something. So his approach was, in like pneumatics control, like almost like a atomic level base units of handling pneumatics on a benchtop, of like a pump module and a valve module and all that kind of stuff, a sensing module, and similar how we're trying to do something similar with pick and place. So there are ways that like you can make money just being paid by the government or NGO or whatever to develop the hardware, really not with shipping it, but just trying to create the designs. There are people who will pay you money to spend your time doing that, which is really cool.
And I love how specific the POSE grant you just described was too. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's really cool. I think they do it once a year, and I think it's relatively new. I haven't looked at it in a while, but I was really looking at it late last year. I was spending a lot of time looking into it. It's really cool. It's definitely worth poking around. If you have a cool thing that you're like, I don't know how feasible this is as a business, but I believe it needs to exist, and I think people will build it and use it to build other important things, look into grants and see if there's some way that you can spin getting money to do the development for this thing and having a small team to work on that. It's a really, really great way to try and bring something into fruition and not have to worry about selling it to somebody, Mm-hmm. So it's more about doing it because it's important that it should exist.
No, it's really great.
Yep.
So yeah, that's grants. If any of you are aware of grants that you think the community around this podcast would appreciate, drop them in the OHM channel of the Lumen PnP server. I'm sure everyone listening would love to know about different avenues for grant funding projects and companies. Yeah,
definitely. Please do if you're aware of other ones.
But next segue here is affiliate links.
Yes.
This is a fun one.
Yes. This is similar to the licensing non-commercial stuff to a manufacturer. This is kind of another way where you can kind of take the thing you designed and kick it off a little bit and just make a little money from other people building it.
So like, for example, we're going to bully Ryan from V1 Engineering, the mostly printed CNC project. There's many parts he doesn't sell, but he links you to an Amazon affiliate link where you can go buy it.
Yep.
And he said it's like helped pay many bills for him.
Yep. It's pretty lucrative.
It's a non-small amount of money you can pull in from just affiliate links.
Sure. And this can be, you don't even have to sell a darn thing. You can have a public bill of materials, and each one of those links is an Amazon affiliate link, or like a lot of companies will do affiliate programs. Sometimes you just have to email and be like, hey, do you guys have an affiliate program? And sometimes they'll make one for you. It's pretty cool. They'll make a code that you can use, use Haas at checkout to get whatever, all that stuff. And you get a cut from it. Mm-hmm. And that's a way that you're bringing them business. So they're stoked on that and they'll pay you a little something. You get a cut from the fact that, it's your project and you don't really do anything. You kind of put it out there and make a little scratch from it. Not a bad way to do it if you just kind of want to keep hands off on it. if you have a PCB design as well, there are ways to get affiliate links for that as well, where like the board shop, you can upload the design to the board shop. And when someone buys it from that page, like in some kind of like community tab or something, then you get a cut of that board even, which is really cool. Like you can get affiliate for PCBs, which is another great way to support the project where you don't have to do it. A board shop's making the boards. You don't even have to think about it. Someone else is doing it and you still get a little bit of money for the commission, which is really nice. And leads us directly into this episode's sponsor. The sponsor of this episode is PCBWay, like we just mentioned, where you can actually upload a PCB design to a board shop. When someone buys it from that page, you actually get a commission. PCBWay does this, and they have support for different versions and bill of materials. I did this for a whole bunch of different versions of the Lumen PNP motherboard way back in the early days, and it was a great way to get a little cash in hand to continue with development. Thank you so much to PCBWay for sponsoring this episode. I had affiliate links, I still technically do, on all of the links in like the description on my YouTube videos. And it's for like tools and stuff. And early on, the bill of materials also had all affiliate links to help go back in and fund development. And it was great. Like it wasn't a tremendous amount of money, but it paid for parts. You know, when people were buying those things, people want to help support you in this. If they can just click on a link, it doesn't cost them anything extra, and you get a little bit of money from that to help support the development of the project. That's a win-win-win.
Yeah, that's great.
That's good across the board.
All day.
Yeah, it's a really, really nice thing to do. So even if you have like tools and equipment that you use to help assemble it, or like just stuff that you like, putting that out in a way where your community can still click on that, help support you a little bit, it's a great way to bring in a little money about it. And of course, on top of that, the bill of materials. I mean, that's what your community really wants. It's the source of all the things that they need to buy. So it's also pretty easy to be an Amazon affiliate. Like you have to go through this like application process or whatever. But once you're in, you can generate links for pretty much anything on the site. It's really, really easy to do. And not just Amazon, like most websites have some kind of affiliate program. It's a really nice way to do it.
And this kind of works too at the B2B level. Like we've had many of our vendors offer affiliate programs for introducing them to new business.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like if you have, like our cable vendor is a good example where they said, anytime you bring us a new hardware company, we will give you % of their sale.
Yeah.
It's not that strange.
It's really not. Yeah. This is just an automated way of doing it where for a big, you know, online platform like Amazon or something, you can just have it all set up that way. So yeah, that's a huge thing to be aware of. If you do kind of want a more hands-off role in the build process and not building them, but you want other people to do it themselves, make a bunch of affiliate links. It's great. It works really well.
Another great way to raise money for open hardware is to take donations.
Yeah.
So like the people behind Voron Designs, for example, they're not really a company. They're not really a nonprofit. They're more of like a foundation. And on vorondesign.com is a donate button.
They're just a group of people.
Yeah.
Like they're not a company. They're like not an organization. They're just a group of folks that like making printers.
Yeah. But it's my impression that they use donations to help fund for prototype parts. That uses they use that money for hosting or like paying to get Voron Design tabling at different conferences.
Events. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a great way for them to raise a couple bucks to keep their project moving.
Yep, exactly. And not have to sell kits.
Yeah.
Which they don't do. They don't sell anything.
Yeah.
Voron themselves. They're just a group of hackers building cool stuff.
Yeah, they're great people.
Yep.
But a key thing about donations is that people will need to see active work.
Yes.
No one's going to want to donate to a project that's dead.
Yeah, exactly. There have to be, like we talked about earlier, like you go to a repo, you got to see commits, you got to see a community, you got to see that there's stuff going on. And like Voron certainly has that if we're using them as an example. Like that's a great indicator that like stuff is moving, things are happening, and showing people that is kind of like this like unspoken exchange of I'm giving you money in exchange for the development that you're doing on this project as a thank you kind of. That's kind of like the unspoken exchange that happens there. So, you know, if you do want to do this, you can't just like put a thing out there and like sit on it and be like, cool, now please donate because I made this thing 3 years ago. Like it kind of implies that you're still working on it. You could still do it, but like, I think you should probably still be pretty actively maintaining it for that. You know, at least that's my perspective on it.
Like another example is Marlin.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one guy named Thinkyhead or Scott.
Yeah.
And our donations to him alongside many other people help keep that software maintained and lets him put food on the table while he makes that software as great as it can for 3D printers around the world.
Mm-hmm. And like he does not charge for Marlin.
Yeah.
He puts it out there because He loves it, and he's trying to make an awesome piece of software. So like, and that's the one side of that unspoken exchange of like, here's this thing. And then all the folks who use it and benefit from it should really pay it back and like fulfill the other side of that thing for the support in the donation. So, that's a way that you can go about doing it too. Like Scott's full-time thing is Marlin. There's other main devs on Marlin too, but Scott's definitely like the main maintainer of it. Yeah. But that's his main thing. That's his number one thing is Marlin. And that is because of donations. Again, software, not hardware, but
if you're using that software to make money though, it's a homey thing to contribute back some support.
Yeah, you just should. It's the reason you're able to make you just do that. Yeah. Another interesting example of this is a Blender. So like, again, software, not hardware, not as many good examples with hardware, but Blender is weird too. I actually just learned this. I was at Open Sauce last weekend and I was talking to some folks about Blender. The only thing in Blender's nonprofit is the trademark and the domain name.
Wow.
Those are the only things in the nonprofit. Everything else is in a for-profit. And it has to do with how like the EU handles nonprofits. And like, if the for-profit goes under, for example, you still want to make sure that the organization that has those really important things stays afloat. And that thing only requires what? I don't know, $60 a year to maintain. I mean, it's like nothing. So so what they do is it is a for-profit where there's a bunch of donations made. I don't know exactly how it all works, but like very large studios donate a ton of money to Blender. And that money goes to pay a whole bunch of developers to continue to make Blender better, make it a good tool. That's how they are able to keep this thing afloat. It kind of feels like a nonprofit because they're developing this open source thing, but big companies are paying them to do it. It's an interesting model there, but it kind of is like a donation, It is technically a donation. You're donating to the Blender organization for that.
I can't think of any example where it's like that for hardware. Can you?
I mean, like there's kind of this for multiboard, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Like multiboard, you can download all the files and print them. And like, you can just go do that. And you can also support the developers and pay them, like make a donation, sign up for the Patreon or whatever. And that is a way to support them. You don't have to do it, but you can. And I think they gate a couple things, like some community stuff behind the paywall too. And like easy method of downloading, like it's some like ease of use stuff. I think they also gate behind it, but like it's effectively that you don't really have to pay that money to get it. You can just choose to donate for it. Yeah. I don't really know if there are other examples.
Blender is a funny one because if you're giving them money, you're probably a major company.
Yeah. You're like a studio, like you're George Lucas.
Yeah.
Like you're Skywalker Studios if you're giving money to Blender.
Yeah, but they also make their source freely available with no strings. So like the hardware equivalent to like what Blender does here would be kind of if like you could donate to Opulo and get support having a Lumen customized to your request.
And we didn't sell it. Yeah, kind of. But also, I don't think the donations actually influence how Blender develops the next batch of stuff. Like, they just donate money. It doesn't come with to do this feature. It's like, here's the money. Go, Blender.org. And then Blender.org decides what's next for Blender. So they're really just paying them to continue staying the course more than anything else.
Okay.
So it's less about getting that feature. So it would be like if we were just developing the Lumen, we didn't sell it, and people were donating money just to perpetuate it. You know what it is? It's exactly like how things were in the early days of the Lumen, where I was just doing the YouTube thing and people were giving money to my Patreon.
Yeah.
And like that was donating money for an open hardware thing. And people were building it and they were just supporting me continuing to do development. And that was it. And like now that it's a company, I never promote that anymore because it's like,
yeah, it's
just weird. But that's kind of that ethos there a little bit. I think mostly where this happens is like YouTubers doing open hardware, and like I can't think of another example. Multiboard I think is not, and he's a YouTuber as well. So obviously the Patreon model is like kind of the way to do this a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. For every method here, it really helps to have a forward-facing like person behind the project, be personable, and like build the community.
Yep. Yeah. You have to have the community for it no matter what. It takes people to create money for a project to keep you sustained.
Yeah.
But
turns out.
Yeah. But yeah. And if you do just have like a Ko-fi or like a donation box on PayPal or whatever, that can be kind of fickle. Like what's really nice about Patreon is it's consistent and people are signing up for a regular thing. And it also gives you an avenue to like give those specific people perks. It's more of an explicit exchange of like, you give me money, I give you extra content, behind the scenes view, early access to files before they're released, whatever it is, it's a really good way to have more of a formal structure behind the donation methodology for an open hardware project.
Yeah.
Patreon's, I like that model of like setting that kind of thing up. And there's other platforms too, if you don't like Patreon, but yeah, that's a pretty good way to do it. And you can have a really big project funded with Patreon as well. Like that's very doable, but typically you see it with a smaller group.
I can't think of a company that's funded by Patreon. It's more for like the person behind a project.
Yeah. Like there are some, like there's a podcast that I love called Dungeons and Daddies. They're fully supported off their Patreon and they make a ton of money on their Patreon. They're a company, like they are an LLC. Yeah. There's like 7 people in the company. It's all through the Patreon. So it's possible, but again, it's still like a small group, right? Like it's not a huge group.
In the RepRap community, there's a couple 3D printer projects where you can download the STL files for free, but to get the steps, you have to join the Patreon and then the source becomes available there. It's less open than I would like it to be.
Yeah, exactly.
I like the most open version of the source should be available, like in the idealized world here.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's very tempting, I think, for many people to make the way you make money from this access to the source, but then it's not open hardware anymore. Yeah. Like there's variances of it, like, oh, the source is open, but the manufacturing things aren't. It's like,
open with extra steps is not open.
Exactly. There it is. That's the quote of the episode. Open with extra steps is not open. It is or it isn't.
Yeah.
Do I have access to the kernel of the source? If I don't, it's not really, and then there's kind of the other asterisk of like the commercial, non-commercial licensing, kind of like the royalties for things. I would argue that's still not fully open, but now we're getting more into the weeds of like, what's true open source? I get to do anything I want with it without restriction. That's fully super duper open,
It's been my impression that it's easier to have a bigger community if you're more open. It's the homie thing to do.
Yep.
Like avoid gatekeeping, like paywalls are kind of rude.
Yeah. Yes. Ultimately, it's your call. We're the open hardware manufacturing podcast. Of course, we're going to be biased in this way. If you want to make your stuff closed, that is your decision. But, we're talking about doing it open. And I think it makes sense to entertain the aspects of this where the source is still available. You can still get access to that regardless. That's really what it means to be open source. What we're talking about here is the ways where you can still make money while keeping that open.
Yeah.
Of course, there are ways to do it with it's closed. Apple is a big company. That's for a different podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, there are a lot of ways that you can still keep your source open for your hardware and make money. Like exist communities of people who will just send you money for donations. You can, of course, always sell it if you want to take that on. You can choose to do a licensing thing, keeping it open, or keeping the source still open, but changing how the commercial stuff works. If you want to dive into that, that is also still an option. Support is really more of a theoretical thing we kind of thought of. And if you could think of an example, please let us know. And then affiliate links is a really good way to do it as well. Same thing as like the licensing where you kind of don't have to do anything, but you make a little money. And research too, which is probably one of the more unexplored ones for us. We haven't really dove into that too much. I spent some time thinking about it, but a huge world. I know a bunch of people who do open hardware in that. I've just never done it myself.
I'd love to hear how it's worked for people.
Yeah.
Like, please leave a message if you're funded by an open source grant.
Yes. Actually, if you do open hardware and you have done any of these things to make money, please tell us. I'm really curious how people do make money from open hardware because like I've only ever done it through donations and selling the thing. Oh, actually, I've done a handful of these. Like affiliate links too has also been part of it, but I've never done a licensing thing. I've never done the support. I've never done research. So like if you do make money in some capacity selling open hardware, please shoot us an email at podcast@opula.io or go into our Discord server, the Loom PnP Discord server. It's all linked in the episode notes and tell us because I'm really curious how people do this. Like how do these things stay sustainable? Because in this world, you need money to live.
An unfortunate reality. So like, how does that happen for folks that do spend time working on this kind of thing? Yeah, and if they're able to share, it's important for others to know so that they can try it out the same way.
Yes, exactly. Like you're setting precedent and showing a cool example of how this could be done for others as well. So please, if you do this, let us know. I really, really want to know how you play the game.
All right, folks, that's it for this one. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to leave a review wherever you get your podcast. It helps us out a ton. You can find Opulo on Twitter and Instagram. And if you had thoughts or questions on the episode, shoot us an email at podcast@opulo.io or hop in our Discord server. Also, please don't forget to check out opulo.io and sign up for our newsletter where we write blog posts and do customer interviews with other folk building open hardware. That's it, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya. I feel like I don't have any momentum here. So.
Would you like me to be your jump start?
Yes.
Would you like me to push the truck and you drop it into first?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Okay.